Hello.
And welcome.
It's the Graveyard Girls. Welcome to our witch trial season.
Yes. And today is an individual case of mine.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to treat you all to the atrocities that were the Pendle witch trials.
Oh, I feel so loved.
Yes. Now, I think a lot of people will have heard of the Pendle witch trials.
Mm-hmm.
And I kind of felt like we couldn't really do this season without mentioning some of the big ones.
Yes.
Now, next week I will be also looking at the Chelmsford ones, which is another absolutely massive one. So, obviously we wanted to cover as much as possible, but obviously the UK ones are quite relevant to us.
Mm-hmm.
That's where we're from. So, and this was a big one. Now, the Pendle trials took place, probably the biggest ones in the 17th century, or some of the biggest. Now, despite the fact for the amount accused, obviously there was a lot more people accused, but not many really went to trial. So in the total of those that went to trial, there was 12 people that would be accused of witchcraft in this Pendle trial.
Mm-hmm.
One would die in custody whilst awaiting trial. One would be tried and found guilty at York, and then the other 10 would be tried at Lancaster. So it kind of split between. Now, this case is a bit of an unusual one because all of these people are kind of tied in with the same story, and it comes from a couple of events that all happen together, whereas a lot of these other trials are just random witches that are picked out at random. Whereas this one, it seems very linked for me.
Yeah.
Now, out of the lot, only one was found not guilty, so they've all been lumped in together. Now, it was an unusual trial in that it was documented in an official publication, which was The Wonderful Discovery of Witches in the County of Lancaster by the Clerk of the Court, Thomas Potts. So it was very well documented in comparison to other ones, which is why I wonder, I don't think there's necessarily that this was the most scandalous one. I feel like this was only probably so well known because it's been so well documented.
Yeah.
There was probably others that we don't know about that were absolutely massive at the time.
Yeah.
They just weren't well documented at all. So for a bit of background, now before I get into like the individual details of like the trials, there's a few bits that I think are worth noting. Now, 6 of the 11 on trial had come from rival families. We had the Demdike family and the Chattocks family. Both families were headed by poverty-stricken widows, Elizabeth Southers, who was Old Demdike, and Anne Whittle, who was Mother Chattocks. Now, Old Demdike had been known as a witch for 50 years, and it was accepted fact in village life at that time. So, like some of the others as we've seen, people weren't bothered by the fact that she was a witch.
Like getting some Mother Shipton vibes.
Mm-hmm. Mm. A lot of these, if you look at them, they're known as like Mother so-and-so. Especially when I go into the Chelmsford one, there's a lot of those that are referred to as Mother. Mm. But I think at the time as well, it was a bit of a lot of it as well, some of them, if they were like a widow, they were named sometimes as Mother as well. So I don't think it's necessarily just a nickname they were given. I think, or you had like good wife and things like that. It was depending on their status. So, you know, instead of saying like Mrs. whatever, it would be like good wife, so ever. Because at first I was thinking...
good wife, bad wife.
But I was looking at so many, it's like, why are these all like named the same? Like, why is there so many mothers? And I think it was more rather than titles of like Miss, Mrs. I think that's the titles for the time.
Yeah.
So I think that's where a lot of it comes from.
Also, it makes sense, like, she's the mother of that family.
Mm-hmm.
Where it's like...
So, like, the matriarch, she's like grandmother, yeah.
It's similar with, like, the Scandinavian last names.
Mm-hmm.
Where it's like, Thomas' daughter or Thomas' son. You are the
that's
son or daughter
head of the house.
Yeah.
So she'd practiced magic that dealt with herbs and medicines. So she's very much a wise woman, if you like, a bit of a healer. And as much as James I had brought fear about witches, there was still very much a fascination about them, and people were able to make large amounts of money from posing as a witch. So there was, I do wonder if this played into a little bit into the trials, as eventually like there was like frauds, if you like. I think that maybe played a part, but the majority of those that were accused of witchcraft genuinely hadn't done anything. So I don't think they were trying to do it for monetary gains, just as much as the witch hunters were doing it for money. Some of these supposed witches were after a bit of money.
Oh.
Now, the king's views would also impose on law. Each justice of peace in Lancashire at the beginning of 1612 were instructed to compile a list of all those who refused to attend church or take communion. Obviously this was then seen as a criminal offence if you didn't, which goes back to the whole flock of sheep thing.
Yep.
So, Lancashire had been regarded as a wild and lawless society. This was possibly related to the general sympathy with the Catholic Church, and obviously, at the time, they were you had to pretty much pick a religion.
Mm-hmm.
And in this point, I think the reason the witches were still so widely accepted is people weren't really that bothered. So it's like everyone saw you had to be religious, but you could be of different views, or your family could almost be a bit mixed in their views, I think, which is quite unheard of at the time. And obviously for everyone else, it was like frowned upon.
Yeah.
Now, during the dissolution of monasteries, which had begun in 1536, the people of Pendle Hill had openly opposed the closure of the nearby Cistercian Abbey and reverted back to Catholicism when Queen Mary came to the throne in 1553. So in comparison to the rest of the country, it was almost like its own little weird village that was set back from the rest of the country. I don't know. I feel like it was, when they try to build like new railways and like land and sell it up, and there's that one stubborn house that refuses to sell up. I feel like this is what the whole village was like.
Yeah.
It's they're very stuck in their ways.
Good for them.
Yeah, good. It's good for them. So to the start of the trials. The trials would come about after an altercation between Alison Device, who would become one of the accused, and a peddler called John Law. Alison had either been travelling or begging on the road of Trawden Forest. She would pass John Law and ask him for some pins. When he refused, Alison cursed him. It was a short while after that John suffered what appeared to be a stroke. He would blame Alison and her powers for this.
Okay. Yeah. Always the same.
Mm-hmm. Her case was then taken to trial and she was brought before Justice Noel. Alison confessed that she told the devil to lame John Law, and it was upon further questioning that Alison would accuse her grandmother, Old Demdike, as well as some members of the Chattox family. It would seem that the accusations of witchcraft against the Chattox family were on an act of revenge. The two families had been feuding for years. One of the members of the Chattox family had broken into Malkin Tower, which was the home of the Demdikes. They stole goods to the value of £1, which is more like £100 in today's money. So for the time, it's a fair bit.
Yeah.
Now, so John Device, Alison's father, who blamed his illness shortly before his death on Mother Chattox. Now, she had supposedly threatened to harm his family if they did not pay an annual fee for their protection. So they're obviously the feuding between each other.
Like a mob boss.
Well, it is that, but I also wondered in terms, like taxes and stuff and land, I wondered if there's parts of it that they've got a share.
Okay.
So, and it's almost like they sort of defended each other, a bit like a neighbourhood watch, but one of them was a bit more dominant than the other. And she was like, you must pay me.
But it's also like, pay me, otherwise I'm going to take your kneecaps off.
Yeah.
That's what it sounds like.
Or I'll curse you. Now, the deaths of 4 other villagers had occurred years before the trial, but were blamed and supposedly caused by witchcraft performed by the Chattox family. James Demdike confessed that Alison had also cursed a local child some time before. So Elizabeth, who is mother to Janet, James and Alison, was more reserved when it came to throwing around her accusations, but she did confess that her mother, who was Old Demdike, had a mark on her body from where the devil had sucked her blood, which had left her mad. I just feel like she's an old, mad, chattering woman, but you've got to blame somewhere. So I feel like she was a bit better in the sense that she wasn't throwing accusations necessarily around at other people. She wasn't throwing the whole of the family's bad, but she also said, the reason her mum was mad was because she was a witch. Maybe she had dementia. I don't know.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking.
After further questioning, both Old Demdike and Mother Chattox confessed to having sold their souls to the devil. I'm presuming under torture.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Anne Chattox, who was the daughter to Mother Chattox, was allegedly seen to create clay figures. So I'm thinking a bit voodoo here. After hearing all of the evidence, Judge Noel detained Alison, Old Demdike, Mother Chattox and Anne, and they awaited trial. The story could have ended there had it not been for a meeting held at Malkin Tower by James Device. He'd stolen the neighbour's sheep.
Oh, for God's sake.
This opened it up. Those sympathetic to the family attended, but word reached the judge and he decided to investigate. As a result, a further 8 people would be summoned for questioning and then put on trial. So I feel like at this point, it's not actually necessarily that they're witches, they've just committed a crime, but they're lumping them all in together.
Yeah.
Now, most would be tried at Lancaster between the 17th and 19th of August, 1612, but Old Demdike never reached her trial because she died in the dungeons where she'd been imprisoned. Okay. So I feel like she's definitely an old lady. So she was the supposed mad one.
Yeah.
Now, Elizabeth, so not Old Demdike, she was the daughter, but the mother so the others,
Yep.
was present at her daughter Janet Device's trial. Now, Janet was only 9 years old.
Yeah, I came across her in some of mine.
She's a bit of a controversial character.
Yeah.
Now, she would be a supplier of evidence. Normally, someone as young as her wouldn't be allowed to supply evidence at a trial. But the system which had been brought in by King James said that all normal rules of evidence could be suspended in witch trials. Janet gave evidence against those who attended the meeting at Malkin Tower. She also gave evidence against her mother, sister and brother. When she gave evidence against her mother, who was Elizabeth, Elizabeth had to be removed from the courtroom as she was screaming and cursing at her own daughter. Alison Device was one of those who believed in her own powers and was also the only one on trial who was put face to face with one of her victims, that being John Law. When John entered the court, it was documented that Alison fell to her knees, confessed and burst into tears.
Okay.
It would be Alison that would accuse Mother Chattox and her daughter Anne. So, like I said, out of all of them, I feel like the only one here that's actually could be on trial for witchcraft is Alison. Mm-hmm. But it seems to me that the whole sides from both families have been lumped in together. Now, there would be 8 that were later accused of meeting at Malkin Tower, and they were Elizabeth Device, James Device, Alice Nutzler, Catherine Hewitt, John Bullock, Jane Bullock, Alice Gray and Janet Preston. Now, Janet Preston lived across the border in Yorkshire, and so that's why she was the only one who was sent to York for her trial. She was found guilty and then hanged on the 29th of July in 1612. Most of the others that didn't belong to the Demdike or Chattox family were peasants, apart from Alice Nuttler, who was from a wealthy family in Ruffley, and she was a widow and owned her own land. Okay, so then at the trial, so Alice Nuttler, she said nothing at her trial besides pleading not guilty. She was, however, found guilty of attending a Good Friday service, which was a Catholic service, which was obviously illegal at the time in the area.
Okay.
And she also attended the meeting at Malkin Tower. So it was seen as she's doing illegal things and bad things, and she's now mixing with other people. Therefore, she's, I suppose, sullied the rest of the group, if you like. So it's a very strange one, because it's like it's got some random people within the community, and I think the only reason they've been thrown in is because they just happened to be at this meeting.
Yeah.
It's literally that.
I think that's what it is. Or just because that guy stole some sheep.
Yeah.
It would have been fine.
But and if he hadn't have done that, he wouldn't have been lumped in for the rest of the trial, and it would have only been like Alison that had gone to trial, and that would have been it.
Yeah.
So it's a very strange one. Now,
and I think, was it Janet? I think she probably accused her mum and the rest of her family because maybe they had a disagreement.
Yes. But also maybe she'd been told by older men who were in the court that, like, this is what she do. Like, I feel like she'd been prepared as a witness sort of thing. Yeah. And maybe told what to say, because she's only 9. It's not like she's going to not say anything.
No.
So then a lady by the name of Alice Gray was the only one to have been found not guilty. She is the only one whose trial wasn't recorded, and she was just listed as being present at Malkin. So I wonder if, even though the others kind of got lumped in, if she was maybe more a passerby. Yeah. So she was just sort of saying, she didn't really actually do anything, but they recorded her. So I wonder if that's why she was found not guilty. Now, the rest were hanged at Gallows Hill on the 20th of August 1612. Accusations brought against the 8 included the murder of Robert Nuttler, turning beer sour, the murders of James Robinson.
The beer was just left out.
Yeah, I think it just went bad. John Robinson and Henry Milton. Now, Elizabeth had been seen making clay figures supposedly of the victim, so that's where I think the voodoo thing comes in. So that's why effectively she was found guilty of witchcraft. James Device was accused of murdering Anne Townley and John Ducksworth, but he pled not guilty. But evidence presented by Janet, his sister, who said she'd seen him asking a black dog he had conjured up to help him kill Anne Townley. This would then be enough for him to be found guilty. So it's almost mixed in with a little bit of spectral evidence there, which in a lot of other courts wasn't allowed in. Then Jane and John Bullock were accused of the murder of Janet Dean. They also both denied being at Malkin Tower, but Janet Device was the one that placed them there, saying it was John who had roasted the stolen sheep. So she adds to it and says not only did he steal the sheep, but he had some. Yeah. So I'm presuming they're a couple. I couldn't find much, so they're either brother and sister or they're a couple. I couldn't quite decipher which one it was.
Okay.
Then Catherine Hewitt was charged with the murder of Anne Fold, and James Device claimed he'd heard her and Alice Gray talking about a child that they had killed. Janet also confirmed she was at the meeting of Malkin Tower. So it's like, I think James sort of threw her under the bus in his thing, and then Janet was the backup.
Yeah.
And again, I feel like that's why I feel like her statement was very much prepared.
Yeah.
And she was sort of told what to say, because I don't see
Okay.
how she could be placed in it otherwise.
Yeah.
It's all sort of hearsay, isn't it? There's no actual thing.
It's all hearsay.
So the prisoners had not been allowed to have a defence counsel, which was obviously quite normal at the time, to plead for them, nor could they call any witnesses to speak on their behalf. Now, this is where it then, Pendle sort of leads into the Samuelsbury witches, which I think you've touched on before. Now, and this trial support also sort of followed in from it. Now, the accused, John Ramsden, Elizabeth Astley, Isabel Southgrave, Lawrence Hayes, Jane Southworth, Janet Broyley and Ellen Broyley, all were from the Pendle area and were also tried alongside Isabel Robley from Windle near St Helens, as well as Margaret Pearson's, who was the Padlum witch. So basically what happened was this Pendle trial happened, it triggered it off, and because these other people were in the Pendle area, it then spurred on a second trial.
Yep.
Now, much of the evidence given by the prosecution witnesses was inconsistent, based upon rumours as well as gossip and false confessions, which is nothing new. So, unlike Pendle though, all the Samuelsbury witches were acquitted. Margaret Pearson was the exception for this, as she was found guilty. However, she was not executed. Instead, she was sentenced to be to pillory, which is basically public humiliation. Yeah. And this happened on 4 consecutive market days in Padlum, Clitheroe, which was in Lancaster. And she would have then had to serve 1 year in prison. So, in terms of this, I don't think that second trial would have happened without the first one.
No, I think that's always the thing. I think there's always one, and there's always one that's going to follow on from the first one.
So it doesn't seem like it was that big, especially when you look in comparison to Europe.
Yeah.
But it was obviously a major one, and it caused a bit of a scandal at the time.
Yeah.
But yeah, I thought it was quite interesting because actually the Pendle ones, obviously, because it was so well documented, you can actually retrace the Pendle witches' footsteps today. Obviously, there's been a lot of books written about it. And you can actually visit the old village where it took place.
I might be mixing it up with something else, but isn't there like a hill with something on with the witch?
Yeah, there's Pendle Hill, and there's also they've got like a trail that you can walk.
Yeah.
And they have a number of sculptures with witches dotted around the woodland. So I think it's a bit like, not a treasure hunt, but like you can walk the trail and look for them all. There's also the Pendle Witches' Long Trail, which goes from Lancaster, which is where they were hanged. So it's like the walk that they would have taken from initially where they were accused at the trial to all the way to where they went, where they were hung. So then even after this Samuelsbury ones, because that happened, then lots of little ones happened in counties around that afterwards, so it all triggered it. So I think, from what I can kind of make out, the initial Pendle one happened, which really should have only contained Alison. Well, it shouldn't have even really contained her, because I don't think she did anything wrong.
No.
But really, it should have been just about her. It was only because she threw some of the other family members in. That then threw up the scandal between the two families. And then James screwed himself over because rather than keeping quiet while there was a trial going on, he decided to commit a crime. Yeah. Which obviously means if the rest of the family is still committing crimes while she's in prison, it can't be her. So the rest of the family is a bit shady.
Yeah, that was a smart move, wasn't it?
So he's then not only implicated himself, but he's implicated the rest of the family and some innocent bystanders.
Yeah. It's just like, I was just coming from a different village. I was just
I was just passing through.
Yeah, it's like nothing. I don't know these people at all.
But that's it. And then I think because there was a whole illegal thing of them throwing the Good Friday, the meeting on that was frowned upon. So I think then almost like the Pendle one, I imagine them being marched through the streets, but I feel like people came from other counties. Yeah. And it was a bit of a show. And then because that happened, it sort of took off, and then people sort of went back to their own counties, and then when they started noticing people doing things, they're like, she's a witch. Yeah. She's a witch. And then it brought more into the UK. Yeah. So I feel like it did spur on a lot of the other ones that
I think
happened
it
around the time. Like I said, it wasn't the biggest trial by any means, but it was so different in the others that actually, really, the trial should have only contained the first person.
Yeah,
well, it shouldn't have even contained her, but really it should have just been a trial of a single person.
It's very interesting that it's kind of like, it's been made, not fun of, it's been made more of, because like you said, they've made trails with, like, you can find witches.
Yeah.
And it's very interesting that they've like made basically a theme park out of it, you could argue. Like,
it's like a tourist sort of attraction. Yeah. But also, I like the fact that, I mean, in most of these cases, the people accused weren't witches. Mm-hmm. But out of all of the other trials, these are the ones to me that are going to be least likely, like, there's none of the whole, they killed my cow sort of thing. I mean, I don't know if technically they stole sheep, but if you look at the crimes, it was something completely different. Like, these were genuine crimes that happened, and it was something else. Yet these other trials were all based off crimes that didn't actually happen or weren't a crime. Do you see what I mean?
It's just two rival families, and then their little petty arguments got them involved with a witch trial, which ended up seeing them dead.
Yeah, and I feel like the whole village was just a bit of an odd thing. Like, I feel like you'd walk through there and they're all like oddballs.
This is that village, like, where your sister lived.
In Castleton.
Yeah.
Yeah, so like I said, it was very different. It's weird. It's like, I don't understand quite how it took off. In comparison to the other trials, it was so very different from the others, yet it seemed to be the most prominent one, which seems strange to me.
I think it's just because it's like two rival families.
Yeah. But yeah, no, so I thought it was, like I said, we couldn't do this without mentioning it, because like I said, it is a big touristy attraction. And yeah, you can go and have a look around where it's now and go and...
Maybe we should go do it one day.
Yeah, I think we should. We'll have a little visit.
Well, if we have more Patreon...
yeah, we can have a day out.
Yeah.
let me out for the day. But yes. So hopefully you've enjoyed this episode.
I did.
Yeah. It's like I said, it's a little bit more light-hearted in comparison
I just like
to the other trials.
I think both families are very petty, and I do kind of like that.
But this is it. It's like I said, I suppose it is again different where it is. It's just them accusing families rather than it being random. Everyone else, it was like a neighbour.
Yeah.
And then it was someone else. Like, even though they had their differences, this is clearly like a long-standing rivalry.
It's like
that's
generations of like rivalry.
And they're so stubborn, but also so stupid. Like, they're literally implicating themselves at the same time.
Yes.
And they're very silly from what I can work out. So maybe they did deserve to go wrong. I'm not saying they necessarily deserve to die, but maybe they could have done with some prison time. Might knock some sense into them.
Yeah, maybe.
But yeah, on that note.
Don't steal a sheep.
Yes.
And end up in a witch trial, which ends up in your family's death.
Yes.
But yes, keep creeping.
And we'll keep digging.